Part 8 of Jerusalem, the Emanation of the Giant Albion by William Blake, edited and read by Tim Bruce. Lo smiled with joy, thinking on Onithaman, and he brought Reuben from his 12-fold wanderings, and led him into it, planting the seeds of the 12 tribes, and Moses and David, and gave a time and revolution to the space, 6,000 years. He called it divine analogy, for in Beulah the feminine emanations create space, the masculine create time, and plant the seeds of beauty in the space. Listening to their lamentation, Los walks upon his ancient mountains in the deadly darkness, among his furnaces directing his laborious myriads, watchful, looking to the east, and his voice is heard over the whole earth, as he watches the furnaces by night and directs the labourers. And thus Los replies upon his watch. The valleys listen silent, the stars stand still to hear, Jerusalem and valour cease to mourn. His voice is heard from Albion, the Alps and Apennines listen, Hermon and Lebanon bow their crowned heads, Babel and Shinar look toward the western gate, they sit down silent at his voice. They view the red globe of fire in Los's hand as he walks from furnace to furnace, directing the labourers. And this is the song of Los, the song that he sings on his watch. O lovely, mild Jerusalem, O Shiloh of Mount Ephraim, I see thy gates of precious stones, thy walls of gold and silver. Thou art the soft reflected image of the sleeping man, who stretched on Albion's rocks reposes amidst his 28 cities, where Beulah lovely terminates, in the hills and valleys of Albion, cities not yet embodied in time and space. Plant ye the seeds, O sisters, in the bosom of time and space's womb, to spring up for Jerusalem, lovely shadow of sleeping Albion. Why wilt thou rend thyself apart, and build an earthly kingdom to reign in pride, and to oppress, and to mix the cup of delusion, O thou that dwellest with Babylon? Come forth, O lovely one. I see thy form, O lovely, mild Jerusalem, winged with 6 wings in the opacous bosom of the sleeper. Lovely, 3-fold in head and heart and reins, 3 universes of love and beauty. Thy forehead bright, holiness to the Lord with gates of pearl reflects eternity. Beneath, thy azure wings of feathery down, ribbed, delicate, and clothed with feathered gold and azure and purple, from thy white shoulders shadowing purity in holiness. Thence, feathered with soft crimson of the ruby, bright as fire, spreading into the azure wings, which like a canopy bends over thy immortal head, in which eternity dwells. Albion, beloved land! I see thy mountains, and thy hills, and valleys, and thy pleasant cities, holiness to the Lord. I see the spectres of thy dead, O emanation of Albion, thy bosom white, translucent, covered with immortal gems, a sublime ornament not obscuring the outlines of beauty, terrible to behold for thy extreme beauty and perfection. 12-fold, here all the tribes of Israel I behold upon the holy land. I see the river of life and tree of life. I see the new Jerusalem descending out of heaven, between thy wings of gold and silver, feathered, immortal, clear as the rainbow, as the cloud of the sun's tabernacle. Thy reins, covered with wings translucent, sometimes covering and sometimes spread abroad, reveal the flames of holiness, which like a robe covers, and like a veil of seraphim in flaming fire unceasing burns from eternity to eternity. 12-fold, I there behold Israel in her tents, a pillar of a cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night guides them. There I behold Moab and Ammon and Amalek. There bells of silver round thy knees living articulate comforting sounds of love and harmony, and on thy feet sandals of gold and pearl, and Egypt and Assyria before me, the isles of Javan, Philistia, Tyre, and Lebanon. Thus Los sings upon his watch, walking from furnace to furnace. He seizes his hammer every hour, flames surround him as he beats, seas roll beneath his feet, tempests muster around his head. The thick hailstones stand ready to obey his voice in the black cloud. His sons labour in thunders at his furnaces. His daughters at their looms sing woes. His emanation separates in milky fibres agonizing among the golden looms of Cathedron, sending fibres of love from Golgonooza with sweet visions for Jerusalem, wanderer. Nor can any consummate bliss without being generated on earth. Of those whose emanations weave the loves of Beulah for Jerusalem and Shiloh in immortal Golgonooza, concentrating in the majestic form of Erin in eternal tears, viewing the winding worm on the deserts of great Tartary, viewing Los in his shudderings, pouring balm on his sorrows. So dread is Los's fury that none dare him to approach without becoming his children in the furnaces of affliction. And Anithamon, like a faint rainbow, waved before him, filling with fibres from his loins, which reddened with desire, into a globe of blood beneath his bosom, trembling in darkness of Albion's clouds. He fed it with his tears and bitter groans, hiding his spectre in invisibility from the timorous shade, till it became a separated cloud of beauty, grace, and love, among the darkness of his furnaces, dividing asunder till she separated stood before him, a lovely female weeping, even Anithamon separated outside, and his loins closed and healed after the separation. His pains he soon forgot, lured by her beauty outside of himself in shadowy grief. 2 wills they had, 2 intellects, and not as in times of old. Silent they wandered hand in hand, like 2 infants wandering from Enion in the deserts, terrified at each other's beauty, envying each other, yet desiring in all-devouring love, repelling weeping Enion, blind and age-bent, into the 4-fold deserts. Los first broke silence, and began to utter his love. O lovely Anithamon, I behold thy graceful forms moving beside me, till intoxicated with a woven labyrinth of beauty and perfection, my wild fibres shoot in veins of blood through all my nervous limbs. Soon overgrown in roots, I shall be closed from thy sight. Seize, therefore, in thy hand the small fibres as they shoot around me. Draw out in pity, and let them run on the winds of thy bosom. I will fix them with pulsations. We will divide them into sons and daughters to live in thy bosom's translucence, as in an eternal morning. Anithamon answered, No, I will seize thy fibres and weave them, not as thou wilt, but as I will. For I will create a round womb beneath my bosom, lest I also be overwoven with love. Be thou assured I never will be thy slave. Let man's delight be love, but woman's delight be pride. In Eden our loves were the same. Here they are opposite. I have loves of my own. I will weave them in Albion's spectre. Cast thou in Jerusalem's shadows thy loves, silk of liquid rubies, jacinths, chrysolites issuing from thy furnaces, while Jerusalem divides thy care. While thou carest for Jerusalem, know that I never will be thine. Also thou hidest valour. From her these fibres shoot to shut me in a grave. You are Albion's victim. He has set his daughter in your path. Los answered, sighing like the bellows of his furnaces, I care not. The swing of my hammer shall measure the starry round. When in eternity man converses with man, they enter into each other's bosom, which are universes of delight in mutual interchange. And first their emanations meet, surrounded by their children. If they embrace and commingle, the human fourfold forms mingle also in thunders of intellect. But if the emanations mingle not, with storms and agitations of earthquakes and consuming fires they roll apart in fear. For man cannot unite with man but by their emanations, which stand both male and female at the gates of each humanity. How then can I ever again be united as man with man, while thou, my emanation, refusest my fibres of dominion? When souls mingle and join through all the fibres of brotherhood, can there be any secret joy on earth greater than this? Anithaman answered, This is woman's world, nor need she any spectre to defend her from man. I will create secret places, and the masculine names of the places, Merlin and Arthur. A triple female tabernacle for moral law I weave, that he who loves Jesus may loathe terrified female love, till God himself become a male, subservient to the female. She spoke in scorn and jealousy, alternate torments, and so speaking she sat down on Sussex shore, singing lulling cadences and playing in sweet intoxication among the glistening fibres of Los, sending them over the ocean eastward into the realms of dark death. O perverse to thyself, contrarious to thy own purposes! For when she began to weave, shooting out in sweet pleasure, her bosom in milky love flowed into the aching fibres of Los, yet contending against him, in pride, sending his fibres over to her objects of jealousy, in the little lovely allegoric night of Albion's daughters, which stretched abroad, expanding east and west and north and south, through all the world of Erin and of Los and all their children. A sullen smile broke from the Specter in mockery and scorn, knowing himself the author of their divisions and shrinkings. Gratified at their contentions, he wiped his tears, he washed his visage. The man who respects woman shall be despised by a woman, and deadly cunning and mean abjectness only shall enjoy them, for I will make their places of joy and love excrementitious, continually building, continually destroying in family feuds, while you are under the dominion of a jealous female, unpermanent for ever because of love and jealousy. You shall want all the minute particulars of life. Thus joyed the Spectre in the dusky fires of Los's forge, eyeing Anithaman, who at her shining loom sings lulling cadences, while Los stood at his anvil in wrath, the victim of their love and hate, dividing the space of love with brazen compasses, in Golgonooza, and in Udanadan, and in Intuthan of Urizen. The blow of his hammer is justice, the swing of his hammer mercy. The force of Los's hammer is eternal forgiveness. But his rage or his mildness were vain. She scattered his love on the wind eastward into her own centre, creating the female womb in mild Jerusalem around the Lamb of God. Loud howl the furnaces of Los, loud roll the wheels of Anithaman. The four Zoas, in all their faded majesty, burst out in fury and fire. Jerusalem took the cup which foamed in valor's hand, like the red sun upon the mountains in the bloody day, upon the hermaphroditic winepresses of love and wrath. Though divided by the cross, and nails, and thorns, and spear, in cruelties of Rahab and Tirzah, permanent, endure a terrible, indefinite, hermaphroditic form, a winepress of love and wrath, double hermaphroditic, 12-fold in allegoric pomp, in selfish holiness, the Pharisæan, the Grammateus, the Presbyterian, the Archierius, the Lyrius, and the Sadducean, double each without side of the other, covering eastern heaven. Thus was the covering cherub revealed, majestic image of selfhood, body put off, the Antichrist accursed, covered with precious stones, a human dragon terrible, and bright stretched over Europe and Asia gorgeous. In 3 nights he devoured the rejected course of death. His head dark, deadly, in its brain encloses a reflection of Eden all perverted. Egypt on the Gihon, many-tongued and many-mouthed. Ethiopia, Libya, the Sea of Rephaim, minute particulars in slavery I behold, among the brick kilns disorganized. And there is Pharaoh in his iron court, and the dragon of the river, and the furnaces of iron. Outwoven from Thames and Tweed and Severn, awful streams, 12 ridges of stone frown over all the earth in tyrant pride, frown over each river, stupendous works of Albion's druid sons, and Albion's forests of oaks covered the earth from pole to pole. His bosom wide reflects Moab and Ammon on the river Pison, since called Arnon. There is Heshbon beautiful, the flocks of Rabbath on the Arnon, and the fish pools of Heshbon, whose currents flow into the Dead Sea by Sodom and Gomorrah. Above his head high, arcing wings, black, filled with eyes, spring upon iron sinews from the scapula and os humeri. There Israel, in bondage to his generalizing gods, Moloch and Chemosh, and in his left breast is Philistia, in druid temples over the whole earth with victims' sacrifice, from Gaza to Damascus, Tyre and Sidon, and the gods of Javan through the isles of Grecia, and all Europe's kings, where Hiddekel pursues his course among the rocks. 2 wings spring from his ribs of brass, starry, black as night, but translucent their blackness as the dazzling of gems. His loins enclose Babylon on Euphrates beautiful, and Rome in sweet Hesperia. There Israel scattered abroad in martyrdoms and slavery I behold. Ah, vision of sorrow! Enclosed by eyeless wings, glowing with fire as the iron heated in the smith's forge, but cold the wind of their dread fury. But in the midst of a devouring stomach, Jerusalem, hidden within the covering cherub, as in a tabernacle of 3-fold workmanship, in allegoric delusion and woe. There the 7 kings of Canaan, and 5 Baalim of Philistia, Sihon and Og, the Anakim and Emim, Nephilim and Gibborim, from Babylon to Rome. And the wings spread from Japan, where the Red Sea terminates the world of generation and death, to Ireland's farthest rocks, where giants builded their causeway into the Sea of Rephaim, but the sea overwhelmed them all. A double female now appeared within the tabernacle, religion hid in war, a dragon red and hidden harlot, each within other, but without, a warlike mighty one of dreadful power sitting upon Horeb, pondering dire and mighty preparations, mustering multitudes innumerable of warlike sons among the sands of Midian and Aram. For multitudes of those who sleep in Allah descend, lured by his warlike symphonies of tabret, pipe, and harp, burst the bottoms of the graves and funeral arks of Beulah. Wandering in that unknown night beyond the silent grave, they become one with the Antichrist and are absorbed in him. The feminine separates from the masculine, and both from man, ceasing to be his emanations, life to themselves assuming. And while they circumscribe his brain, and while they circumscribe his heart, and while they circumscribe his loins, a veil and net of veins of red blood grows around them like a scarlet robe, covering them from the sight of man, like the woven veil of sleep, such as the flowers of Beulah weave to be their funeral mantles, but dark, opaque, tender to touch and painful, and agonizing to the embrace of love, and to the mingling of soft fibres of tender affection. But no more the masculine mingles with the feminine, but the sublime is shut out from the pathos in howling torment, to build stone walls of separation, compelling the pathos to weave curtains of hiding secrecy from the torment. Bowen and Conwenna stood on Skiddaw cutting the fibres of Benjamin from Chester's river. Loud the river, loud the Mersey, and the Ribble thunder into the Irish Sea, as the 12 sons of Albion drank and imbibed the life and eternal form of Louver. Cheshire and Lancashire and Westmoreland groan in anguish as they cut the fibres from the rivers. He sears them with hot iron of his forge and fixes them into bones of chalk and rock. Conwenna sat above. With solemn cadences she drew fibres of life out from the bones into her golden loom. Hand had his furnace on Highgate's heights, and it reached to Brockley Hills across the Thames. He, with double Boadicea, in cruel pride, cut Reuben apart from the hills of Surrey, commingling with Louver, and with the sepulchre of Louver. For the male is a furnace of beryl, the female is a golden loom. Los cries, "No individual ought to appropriate to himself or to his emanation any of the universal characteristics of David or of Eve, of the woman or of the Lord, of Reuben or of Benjamin, of Joseph or Judah or Levi. Those who dare appropriate to themselves universal attributes are the blasphemous selfhoods, and must be broken asunder. A vegetated Christ and a virgin Eve are the hermaphroditic blasphemy. By his maternal birth he is that evil one, and his maternal humanity must be put off eternally, lest the sexual generation swallow up regeneration. Come, Lord Jesus, take on thee the satanic body of holiness." So Los cried in the valleys of Middlesex, in the spirit of prophecy, while in selfhood Hand and Hyle and Bowen and Schofield appropriate the divine names, seeking to vegetate the divine vision in a corporeal and ever-dying vegetation and corruption. Mingling with Louver in one, they become one great Satan. Loud scream the daughters of Albion beneath the tongs and hammer. Dolorous are their lamentations in the burning forge. They drink Reuben and Benjamin as the iron drinks the fire. They are red-hot with cruelty, raving along the banks of Thames, and on Tyburn's brook among the howling victims in loveliness, while Hand and Hyle condense the little ones and erect them into a mighty temple even to the stars. But they vegetate beneath Los's hammer, that life may not be blotted out. For Los said, "When the individual appropriates universality, he divides into male and female. And when the male and female appropriate individuality, they become an eternal death. Hermaphroditic worshippers of a god of cruelty and law, your slaves and captives you compel to worship a god of mercy. These are the demonstrations of Los and the blows of my mighty hammer." So Los spoke, and the giants of Albion, terrified and ashamed with Los's thunderous words, began to build trembling, rocking stones, for his words roll in thunders and lightnings among the temples, terrified, rocking to and fro upon the earth, and sometimes resting in a circle in Malden, or in Straithness or Durra, plotting to devour Albion and Los, the friend of Albion, denying in private, mocking God and eternal life, and in public, collusion, calling themselves deists, worshipping the maternal humanity, calling it nature and natural religion. But still the thunder of Los peals loud, and thus the thunders cry, "These beautiful witchcrafts of Albion are gratified by cruelty. It is easier to forgive an enemy than to forgive a friend. The man who permits you to injure him deserves your vengeance. He also will receive it. Go, Specter, obey my most secret desire, which thou knowest without my speaking. Go to these fiends of righteousness. Tell them to obey their humanities and pretend not holiness, when they are murderers, as far as my hammer and anvil permit. Go. Tell them that the worship of God is honoring his gifts in other men, and loving the greatest men best, each according to his genius, which is the Holy Ghost in man. There is no other God than that God who is the intellectual fountain of humanity. He who envies or calumniates, which is murder and cruelty, murders the Holy One. Go tell them this, and overthrow their cup, their bread, their altar table, their incense and their oath, their marriage and their baptism, their burial and consecration. I have tried to make friends by corporeal gifts, but have only made enemies. I never made friends but by spiritual gifts, by severe contentions of friendships and the burning fire of thought. He who would see the divinity must see him in his children, one first in friendship and love, then a divine family, and in the midst Jesus will appear. So he who wishes to see a vision, a perfect whole, must see it in its minute particulars, organized, and not as thou, O fiend of righteousness, pretendest. Thine is a disorganized and snowy cloud, brooder of tempest and destructive war. You smile with pomp and rigor. You talk of benevolence and virtue. I act with benevolence and virtue and get murdered time after time. You accumulate particulars and murder by analyzing that you may take the aggregate, and you call the aggregate moral law. And you call that swelled and bloated form a minute particular. But general forms have their vitality in particulars, and every particular is a man, a divine member of the divine Jesus. So Los cried at his anvil, in the horrible darkness weeping. The Spectre builded stupendous works, taking the starry heavens like to the curtain, and folding them according to his will, repeating the Smaragdine table of Hermes to draw Los down into the indefinite, refusing to believe without demonstration. Los reads the stars of Albion. The Spectre reads the voids between the stars, among the arches of Albion's tomb sublime, rolling the sea in rocky paths, forming Leviathan and Behemoth, the war by sea enormous, and the war by land astounding, erecting pillars in the deepest hell to reach the heavenly arches. Los beheld undaunted, furious his heaved hammer. He swung it round, and at one blow, in unpitying ruin, driving down the pyramids of pride, smiting the Spectre on his anvil, and the integuments of his eye and ear unbinding in dire pain, with many blows, of strict severity self-subduing, and with many tears labouring. Then he sent forth the Spectre. All his pyramids were grains of sand, and his pillars dust on the fly's wing, and his starry heavens a moth of gold and silver, mocking his anxious grasp. Thus Los altered his Spectre, and every ratio of his reason he altered time after time, with dire pain and many tears, till he had completely divided him into a separate space. Terrified, Los sat to behold, trembling and weeping and howling. I care not whether a man is good or evil. All that I care is whether he is a wise man or a fool. Go, put off holiness, and put on intellect, or my thunderous hammer shall drive thee to wrath which thou condemnest, till thou obey my voice. So Los, terrified, cries, trembling and weeping and howling, Beholding, what do I see? The Briton, Saxon, Roman, Norman, amalgamating in my furnaces into one nation, the English, and taking refuge in the loins of Albion, the Canaanite united with a fugitive Hebrew, whom she divided into 12 and sold into Egypt, then scattered the Egyptian and Hebrew to the 4 winds. This sinful nation created in our furnaces and looms is Albion. So Los spoke. Anithamon answered in great terror in Lambeth's vale. The poet's song draws to its period, and Anithamon is no more. For if he be that Albion, I can never weave him in my looms. But when he touches the first fibrous thread like filmy dew, my looms will be no more, and I, annihilate, vanish for ever. Then thou wilt create another female according to thy will. Los answered swift as the shuttle of gold. Sexes must vanish and cease to be, when Albion arises from his dread repose, O lovely Anithamon, when all their crimes, their punishments, their accusations of sin, all their jealousies, revenges, murders, hidings of cruelty and deceit, appear only in the outward spheres of visionary space and time, in the shadows of possibility, by mutual forgiveness for evermore, and in the vision and in the prophecy, that we may foresee and avoid the terrors of creation and redemption and judgment, beholding them displayed in the emanative visions of Canaan, in Jerusalem, and in Shiloh, and in the shadows of remembrance, and in the chaos of the Specter, Amalek, Edom, Egypt, Moab, Ammon, Asher, Philistia, around Jerusalem, where the Druids reared their rocky circles to make permanent remembrance of sin, and the tree of good and evil sprang from the rocky circle and snake of the Druid, along the valley of Rephaim from Camberwell to Golgotha, and framed the mundane shell cavernous in length, breadth, and height. Anithamon heard. She raised her head like the mild moon. O Rintra, O Palamabron, what are your dire and awful purposes? Anithamon's name is nothing before you. You forget all my love. The mother's love of obedience is forgotten, and you seek a love of the pride of dominion, that wilt divorce a Calithron, an Elenitria, upon East Moor in Derbyshire, and along the valleys of Cheviot. Could you love me, Rintra, if you pride not in my love? As Reuben found mandrakes in the field and gave them to his mother, pride meets with pride upon the mountains in the stormy day, in that terrible day of Rintra's plough and of Satan's driving the team. Then I heard my little ones weeping along the valley. Then I saw my beloved ones fleeing from my tent. Merlin was like thee, Rintra, among the giants of Albion. Judah was like Palamabron. O Simeon, O Levi, ye fled away. How can I hear my little ones weeping along the valley, or how upon the distant hills see my beloved's tents? Then Los again took up his speech, as Anithamon ceased. Fear not, my sons, this waking death. He has become one with me. Behold him here. We shall not die. We shall be united in Jesus. Will you suffer this Satan, this body of doubt that seems but is not, to occupy the very threshold of eternal life? If Bacon, Newton, Locke deny a conscience in man, and the communion of saints and angels, contemning the divine vision and fruition, worshipping the deus of the heathen, the god of this world, and the goddess nature, mystery, Babylon the great, the druid dragon and hidden harlot, is it not that signal of the morning which was told us in the beginning? Thus they converse upon Mam Tor. The graves thunder under their feet. Albion cold lays on his rock. Storms and snows beat round him, beneath the furnaces and the starry wheels and the immortal tomb. Howling winds cover him. Roaring seas dash furious against him. In the deep darkness broad lightnings glare. Long thunders roll. The weeds of death enwrap his hands and feet. Blown incessant and washed incessant by the forever restless sea waves foaming abroad upon the white rock. England, a female shadow, as deadly damps of the mines of Cornwall and Derbyshire, lays upon his bosom heavy, moved by the wind in volumes of thick cloud, returning, folding round his loins and bosom, unremovable by swelling storms and loud rending of enraged thunders. Around them the starry wheels of their giant suns revolve, and over them the furnaces of Los, and the immortal tomb around, Erin sitting in the tomb to watch them unceasing night and day. And the body of Albion was closed apart from all nations. Over them the famished eagle screams on bony wings, and around them howls the wolf of famine. Deep heaves the ocean black, thundering around the wormy garments of Albion. Then, pausing in death-like silence, time was finished. The breath divine breathed over Albion, beneath the furnaces and starry wheels, and in the immortal tomb. And England, who is Britannia, awoke from death on Albion's bosom. She awoke pale and cold. She fainted 7 times on the body of Albion. "O piteous sleep! O piteous dream! O God, awake! I have slain in dreams of chastity and moral law. I have murdered Albion. In Stonehenge, and on London Stone, and in the oak groves of Malden, I have slain him in my sleep with the knife of the Druid. O England, O all ye nations of the earth, behold ye the jealous wife!" The eagle and the wolf and monkey and owl and the king and priest were there. Her voice pierced Albion's clay-cold ear. He moved upon the rock. The breath divine went forth upon the morning hills. Albion moved upon the rock. He opened his eyelids in pain. In pain he moved his stony members. He saw England. Shall the dead live again? The breath divine went forth over the morning hills. Albion rose in anger, the wrath of God breaking, bright flaming on all sides around his awful limbs. Into the heavens he walked, clothed in flames, loud thundering with broad flashes of flaming lightning and pillars of fire, speaking the words of eternity in human forms, in direful revolutions of action and passion, through the 4 elements on all sides surrounding his awful members. Thou seest the sun in heavy clouds struggling to rise above the mountains. In his burning hand he takes his bow, then chooses out his arrows of flaming gold. Murmuring, the bowstring breathes with ardour. Clouds roll round the horns of the wide bow. Loud-sounding winds sport on the mountain brows, compelling Urizen to his furrow, and Tharmas to his sheepfold, and Luva to his loom. Othona he beheld mighty, labouring at his anvil, in the great Specter, Los unwearied, labouring and weeping. Therefore the sons of Eden praise Othona's Specter in songs, because he kept the divine vision in time of trouble. As the sun and moon lead forward the visions of heaven and earth, England, who is Britannia, entered Albion's bosom rejoicing. Then Jesus appeared, standing by Albion as the good shepherd by the lost sheep that he hath found. And Albion knew that it was the Lord, the universal humanity. And Albion saw his form a man, and they conversed as man with man in ages of eternity. And the divine appearance was the likeness and similitude of Los. Albion said, O Lord, what can I do? My selfhood cruel marches against thee, deceitful, from Sinai and from Edom into the wilderness of Judah to meet thee in his pride. I behold the visions of my deadly sleep of 6,000 years, dazzling around thy skirts like a serpent of precious stones and gold. I know it is myself, O my divine Creator and Redeemer. Jesus replied, Fear not, Albion. Unless I die, thou canst not live. But if I die, I shall arise again, and thou with me. This is friendship and brotherhood. Without it man is not. So Jesus spoke. The covering cherub, coming on in darkness, overshadowed them, and Jesus said, Thus do men in eternity, one for another, to put off by forgiveness every sin. Albion replied, Cannot man exist without mysterious offering of self for another? Is this friendship and brotherhood? I see thee in the likeness and similitude of Los, my friend. Jesus said, Wouldst thou love one who never died for thee, or ever die for one who had not died for thee? And if God dieth not for man, and giveth not himself eternally for man, man could not exist. For man is love, as God is love. Every kindness to another is a little death in the divine image, nor can man exist but by brotherhood. So saying, the cloud overshadowing divided them asunder. Albion stood in terror, not for himself, but for his friend divine, and self was lost in the contemplation of faith and wonder at the divine mercy and at Los's sublime honour. Do I sleep amidst danger to friends? O my cities and counties, do you sleep? Rouse up! Rouse up! Eternal death is abroad! So Albion spoke, and threw himself into the furnaces of affliction. All was a vision, all a dream. The furnaces became fountains of living waters flowing from the humanity divine. And all the cities of Albion rose from their slumbers, and all the sons and daughters of Albion on soft clouds waking from sleep. Soon, all around remote, the heavens burnt with flaming fires, and Urizen, and Luva, and Tharmas, and Othona arose into Albion's bosom. Then Albion stood before Jesus in the clouds of heaven, fourfold, among the visions of God in eternity. Awake, awake, Jerusalem, O lovely emanation of Albion! Awake and o'erspread all nations as in ancient time. For lo, the night of death is past, and the eternal day appears upon our hills. Awake, Jerusalem, and come away. So spake the vision of Albion, and in him so spake in my hearing the universal Father. Then Albion stretched his hand into infinitude, and took his bow, fourfold the vision, for bright beaming Urizen laid his hand on the south, and took a breathing bow of carved gold, Luva, his hand stretched to the east, and bore a silver bow, bright shining. Tharmas, westward, a bow of brass, pure flaming, richly wrought. Othona, northward, in thick storms, a bow of iron, terrible thundering. And the bow is a male and female, and the quiver of the arrows of love are the children of this bow, a bow of mercy and loving kindness, laying open the hidden heart in wars of mutual benevolence, wars of love. And the hand of man grasps firm between the male and female loves, and he clothed himself in bow and arrows, in awful state, fourfold, in the midst of his 28 cities, each with his bow breathing. Then each an arrow flaming from his quiver fitted carefully. They drew fourfold the unreprovable string, bending through the wide heavens the horned bow fourfold. Loud sounding flew the flaming arrow fourfold. Murmuring the bowstring breathes with ardour. Clouds roll round the horns of the wide bow. Loud sounding winds sport on the mountain's brows. The druid Specter was annihilate. Loud thundering, rejoicing, terrific, vanishing, fourfold annihilation. And at the clangour of the arrows of intellect, the innumerable chariots of the Almighty appeared in heaven, and Bacon and Newton and Locke and Milton and Shakespeare and Chaucer, a sun of blood-red wrath surrounding heaven, on all sides around, glorious, incomprehensible by mortal man, and each chariot was sexual threefold, and every man stood fourfold. Each 4 faces had, one to the west, one toward the east, one to the south, one to the north. The horses fourfold, and the dim chaos brightened beneath, above, around, eyed as the peacock, according to the human nerves of sensation, the 4 rivers of the water of life. South stood the nerves of the eye, east, in rivers of bliss, the nerves of the expansive nostrils. West flowed the parent sense, the tongue. North stood the labyrinthine ear, circumscribing and circumcising the excrementitious husk and covering, into vacuum evaporating, revealing the lineaments of man, driving outward the body of death, in an eternal death and resurrection, awaking it to life among the flowers of Beulah, rejoicing in unity in the 4 senses, in the outline, the circumference and form, forever, in forgiveness of sins, which is self-annihilation. It is the covenant of Jehovah. The 4 living creatures, chariots of humanity divine, incomprehensible, in beautiful paradises expand. These are the 4 rivers of paradise, and the 4 faces of humanity, fronting the 4 cardinal points of heaven, going forward, forward, irresistible from eternity to eternity. And they converse together in visionary forms dramatic, which bright redounded from their tongues in thunderous majesty, in visions, in new expanses, creating exemplars of memory and of intellect, creating space, creating time, according to the wonders divine of human imagination, throughout all the 3 regions immense of childhood, manhood, and old age. And the all-tremendous, unfathomable, non-entities of death was seen in regenerations terrific, or complacent, varying according to the subject of discourse. And every word and every character was human according to the expansion or contraction, the translucence or opaqueness of nervous fibres. Such was the variation of time and space, which vary according as the organs of perception vary, and they walked to and fro in eternity as one man, reflecting each in each, and clearly seen and seeing according to fitness and order. And I heard Jehovah speak terrific from his holy place, and saw the words of the mutual covenant divine on chariots of gold and jewels, with living creatures, starry and flaming with every colour, lion, tiger, horse, elephant, eagle, dove, fly, worm, and the all-wondrous serpent clothed in gems and rich array, human eyes in the forgiveness of sins, according to the covenant of Jehovah. They cry, "Where is the covenant of Priam, the moral virtues of the heathen? Where is the tree of good and evil that rooted beneath the cruel heel of Albion's Specter, the patriarch Druid? Where are all his human sacrifices for sin in war, and in the Druid temples of the accuser of sin, beneath the oak groves of Albion that covered the whole earth beneath his spectre? Where are the kingdoms of the world and all their glory that grew on desolation, the fruit of Albion's poverty tree, when the triple-headed Gog-Magog, giant of Albion, taxed the nations into desolation and then gave the Specter's oath? Such is the cry from all the earth, from the living creatures of the earth, and from the great city of Golgonooza in the shadowy generation, and from the 32 nations of the earth among the living creatures. All human forms identified, even tree, metal, earth, and stone. All human forms identified, living, going forth and returning wearied into the planetary lives of years, months, days, and hours, reposing, and then awaking into his bosom in the life of immortality. And I heard the name of their emanations. They are named Jerusalem. The end of the Song of Jerusalem, the Emanation of the Giant Albion, by William Blake, edited and read by Tim Bruce.